What if I told you there was a story of a woman who defied all odds, faced one of the most terrifying military forces of her time, and delivered her people from certain destruction, only to have her story almost erased from history? A woman so fearless, so devoted, that she single-handedly changed the course of a nation's fate. A woman whose faith was her greatest weapon, and whose bravery became the catalyst for one of the most unexpected victories in biblical history. And yet her story is missing from many of the Bibles that you may read today. What happened to this remarkable woman? Why was her tale of heroism hidden away from so many? Stay with us as we uncover the untold, forbidden story of Judith, the warrior widow whose courage and faith brought salvation to Israel and forever changed the way we should think about true strength. To understand why Judith's story was removed from some versions of the Bible, we must first take a journey back to one of the most precarious, turbulent moments in the history of Israel. The story of Judith unfolds during a period of relentless struggle, a time when the nation of Israel teetered on the edge of obliteration. The mighty Assyrian Empire, led by the ruthless king Nebuchadnezzar, was at the height of its power. This was no ordinary empire. It was a sprawling dominion that held vast territories under its iron grip, an unstoppable force crushing anything in its path. King Nebuchadnezzar wasn't content with simple expansion or distant admiration from the nations he conquered. No, his ambition was singular and absolute. He demanded total submission from every land, every people. Under his rule, any kingdom that resisted, that dared to stand in defiance, would be met with complete and utter destruction. And his chosen instrument for this brutal domination was General Holofernes, a commander as feared as he was merciless. Holofernes' name struck terror into the hearts of people across the ancient world, his reputation darkened by countless campaigns marked by bloodshed and ruin. When the Assyrian army reached Israel's borders, hope vanished. Israel was vastly outmatched, a small, vulnerable nation surrounded by a powerful and unforgiving empire. The leaders of Israel, once men of conviction and faith, found themselves paralyzed, watching helplessly as one town after another fell under the Assyrian assault. Their courage, worn thin by the devastation that had already swept through neighboring nations, was all but shattered. This was no ordinary enemy. They faced an empire with no mercy, driven by a hunger for domination and a willingness to crush any resistance with devastating force. And so, in the heart of Israel, a deep, agonizing despair took root. The people were desperate, their cries echoing through the night as they turned to God, their voices raw with fear and pleas for deliverance. They questioned, they doubted, and they wondered if they had been forsaken. Was this truly the end? Would Israel be swept away, another kingdom devoured by the unstoppable tide of Assyrian conquest? Would the stories of God's past deliverances remain only as distant memories, tales of a time when he had once come to the aid of his people? The air was thick with dread and resignation, and the shadow of Assyria seemed insurmountable. But in the depths of this darkness, at the very moment when all hope appeared to be lost, a light began to shine, a light in the form of an unlikely savior. A woman, resolute and unafraid, emerged from the shadows to challenge everything they thought they knew about strength and deliverance. Her name was Judith. She was a widow from a small town called Bethulia, located just on the edge of the Assyrian advance. The leaders of her town were paralyzed with fear, uncertain of how to confront the growing threat. The men, traditionally the warriors and protectors, trembled at the sight of the mighty Assyrian army. But Judith, this unlikely heroine, was different. Judith was no ordinary woman. Though she was a widow, she was neither meek nor helpless. She was strong, wise, and her faith was unshakable. In a time when women were rarely seen as leaders, let alone warriors, Judith stepped forward with a plan that would defy all expectations. It wasn't brute force or military training that made Judith formidable. It was her profound faith, her courage to stand alone when everyone else faltered, and her willingness to risk everything for the sake of her people and her God. Judith understood something the leaders of Israel had forgotten, that God had delivered his people in the past, and he would do it again, if only they had the courage to believe. As Judith's story reminds us, true power often lies in unshakable belief. And if you're ready to tap into a wealth of abundance and attract huge money effortlessly, just like countless others have already done, don't miss this. Check the link in the comments below to uncover the shocking wealth secrets revealed by a rogue NASA scientist. This could be the breakthrough you've been waiting for. Now let's return to our journey with Judith and uncover even more of her remarkable story. Before taking any action, Judith began her mission not with weapons, but with prayer. She fasted and humbled herself before God, seeking his guidance. As she prayed, she heard a calling, a voice urging her to step forward and take action, to stand in the gap for Israel. Her heart was set on a path that would lead her straight into the heart of the enemy camp. Judith wasn't just praying for her own safety. She was interceding for the people of Israel. She knew that the battle wasn't just a physical one. It was a spiritual one. Israel's survival depended on more than just human strength. It depended on divine intervention, and Judith was prepared to be the vessel through which that divine intervention would come. But her plan was one that would shock her people. In a time of war, when every man in Israel was afraid to act, Judith had already made her decision. She would go to the Assyrian camp, alone, to face General Holofernes, the brutal leader who had crushed so many nations, and confront him head-on. Her decision was audacious, dangerous, and beyond anything her fellow Israelites could have imagined. But to Judith, it was the only way. She knew that this was the moment God had prepared for her. If she didn't step forward, Israel would perish. Judith's preparation was meticulous. She didn't just gather her courage, she prepared herself physically and spiritually. She knew that she would need more than just a plan. She would need to be sharp in every way. Her outward appearance became an essential part of her strategy. She dressed in fine garments, adorned herself with jewelry, and prepared her hair and face. Judith's beauty wasn't vanity. It was part of a divine strategy. The people of Bethulia watched in disbelief as Judith, a widow who had once worn mourning clothes, now transformed herself into a vision of elegance and poise. Some questioned her decision, others feared for her life. But Judith was resolute. She knew the power of appearances, and she used that to her advantage. It wasn't the physical strength of her body that would defeat the Assyrians. It was the strength of her faith, her wisdom, and her unwavering belief that God would deliver her. Judith wasn't just dressing for the journey. She was preparing herself for a battle of wits, courage, and divine timing. As the sun set, Judith and her maid set out from Bethulia, moving under the cover of darkness. They approached the Assyrian camp, where the soldiers, stunned by Judith's beauty and unarmed appearance, allowed her to pass through their gates. When the Assyrian soldiers saw her, they were astonished. A woman, walking confidently into the heart of their camp, was an enigma they didn't know how to handle. Judith's arrival was soon reported to Holofernes, who, driven by both curiosity and arrogance, summoned her to his tent. Judith entered the tent with grace, her every movement calculated to disarm and distract. To Holofernes, she appeared as a humble widow, seeking to offer herself to him. But behind her soft words and modest demeanor, Judith had already begun her delicate game of strategy. She told him that she had fled Bethulia and could offer him valuable intelligence about the city. She spoke to him with great respect, appealing to his ego and playing into his belief that he was invincible. She promised him that Israel would fall, that victory was assured. Holofernes, blinded by his arrogance, believed every word she said. But what he didn't know was that Judith was playing him. She had come to kill him, to bring down the very symbol of Assyrian power. Holofernes, intoxicated by his own self-importance and by Judith's charm, invited her to a lavish banquet. Judith, ever patient, accepted. As the evening wore on, Holofernes drank deeply, growing increasingly drunk and careless. His soldiers, oblivious to the danger, continued to celebrate, their general's confidence now at a dangerous peak. But Judith was focused. She watched as Holofernes grew drowsy, his eyes heavy with the effects of alcohol. As the camp settled into the quiet of the night, Judith knew that her moment had arrived. She wasn't just facing a military leader. She was facing the embodiment of her people's oppression. With one swift, precise movement, she knew she could change everything. And so, when Holofernes fell into a deep sleep, Judith acted. With unwavering courage, Judith took Holofernes' own sword, a weapon used to strike fear into the hearts of Israel, and in one swift, decisive blow, she severed his head. The general who had brought terror to countless nations, the symbol of Assyrian might, lay defeated in front of her. Judith didn't stop to celebrate. She carefully placed his severed head in a sack and slipped out of the camp as quietly as she had entered. Her mission was complete. The leader of the Assyrian army was dead, and Israel's chance for survival had just been secured. The journey back to Bethulia was filled with a quiet, profound sense of triumph. As Judith walked through the early morning light, the weight of her achievement settled around her, but she remained humble, determined to deliver the evidence of victory to her people. Each step closer to Bethulia held the promise of liberation for Israel. She was no longer just a widow or a humble woman from a small town. She was a vessel of divine courage, returning with a message that would shake her people's souls and fill their hearts with newfound strength. When Judith finally arrived at the gates of the city, she was met by anxious faces, eyes filled with worry and resignation, bracing themselves for news of defeat. But Judith had returned, not empty-handed, and her resolve was clear. Slowly, deliberately, she unveiled the head of Holofernes, the symbol of Assyrian might, to the people of Bethulia. Gasps filled the air, and despair turned to astonishment as they took in the sight. Holofernes, the brutal leader who had terrorized nations, whose very name inspired dread, was dead. His severed head lay in the hands of a woman from their own town, a woman who had dared to face the very heart of the enemy alone. For a moment, there was silence as her people absorbed the magnitude of what Judith had accomplished. And then, as if breaking free from a collective nightmare, shouts of victory erupted. The people of Bethulia wept with joy, shouted with amazement, and praised God for this miracle. They gathered around Judith, their awe overflowing. How could one woman have achieved what they all had deemed impossible? But Israel had been saved, not by an army or a powerful leader, but by the unwavering faith and courage of a single woman, a woman whose trust in God had led her into the very depths of enemy territory and emerged victorious. Judith's actions inspired the people to rise up. No longer would they cower in fear. No longer would they submit to the shadow of the Assyrian Empire. The people of Bethulia, emboldened by Judith's victory, rallied together, united in purpose and in spirit. Judith's courage became their courage, and they were now filled with a collective resolve to defend their homeland. The Assyrian soldiers, once a terrifying force looming on Israel's borders, were now scattered, leaderless, and shaken. One by one, the Assyrians fled, abandoning their positions as the people of Israel, newly fortified with Judith's bravery, pursued them with relentless determination. What had once seemed like certain defeat had transformed into a glorious victory. The people of Israel drove out the Assyrian invaders, reclaiming their lands and restoring their freedom. And as they celebrated, they knew it was Judith's bravery and trust in God that had turned the tides. This widow from Bethulia had, against all odds, inspired a nation, proving that true strength lies not in numbers or might, but in the power of faith and the courage to act upon it. Judith's return was met with awe and reverence. The elders who had doubted God's willingness to save them now bowed before her in gratitude. She was no longer just a widow. She was a heroine, a living testament to the power of faith and divine strength. Her victory song rang out across Israel, and her story was passed down for generations. The book of Judith became a reminder that even in the darkest of times, God's power could work through the unlikeliest of vessels. Judith's life proved that courage, when fueled by faith, could overcome any obstacle. Judith lived a long, respected life, never remarrying, always devoted to God. Her legacy endures as a powerful reminder of what faith can accomplish. Her story challenges us to ask, how far are we willing to go when we believe in God's power? What risks are we willing to take to stand for what is right? Though her story has been hidden from many, Judith's example remains. It is a call to live fearlessly, to trust in God no matter the odds, and to know that with faith, anything is possible. If Judith's story has inspired you, let us know in the comments. Would you like to hear more about hidden figures in the Bible whose stories reveal the depth of God's providence? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who need to hear this powerful message. Because Judith's story is not just history, it's a call to live courageously in faith.